Well, this is John Black, super chemist, JBSC again. We're going to talk about slavery, USA slavery. I tell you what, man, anyone, any black person who brings up slavery and is upset about slavery in the United States is about the biggest moron I've ever seen in my entire life. Slavery was 160 years ago, almost 2 centuries ago. And if you're there saying, I really feel bad because my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather and grandmother were slaves, you're a fucking moron and you need mental help, okay? I don't even give a fuck what happened to my great-grandparents. I don't care if they were raped and fucking tortured and slaves. I don't give a fuck. I don't even know them. I barely care what my grandparents had to go through, okay? And I actually knew them. When someone came and told me, you know what, your grandparents, they were slaves, man. And they were beaten, and so they were kidnapped, and for 40 years they were. Someone had them in their basement, and they were beating them and raping them, and blah 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 blah. You know what I would say? I don't give a shit. I barely knew them people. What the fuck? But my great grandparents, I didn't know them at all. I never met them. How would I give a shit about them? But when you say your great grandparents, you're an idiot, okay? And if you can't see that you're a moron, then there's something wrong with you. Then you care. So, like, were you close? Were these black people close to their great grandparents? Were they close to them? I don't think so. So, but getting past that, the left says that the slavery in the USA was white people. White people went over to Africa, went inside, started capturing black people and took them back to the Americas and made them into slaves. First of all, that's all lie. Then you got the right. No, the white people, yes, they did go to Africa, but they didn't enslave the people. They were already enslaved by other black people. And the white people bought the black people off of the black people and brought them back and made them into slaves and that. You know what I mean? Now, let me describe what slavery is for real. Okay? No one's going to believe me. I'm a fucking moron. I'll tell you, okay? You had rich people in Africa, okay, who had the power, the elites, and they enslaved the poor people in Africa and made them into slaves. Then you had the rich elite people in America go over and buy the poor slaves that were enslaved by the rich elites in Africa, and then they brought those slaves back and they made them into slaves. Did you notice how never one time did I mention skin color? Never once. Not one time. Because skin color had nothing to do with it. You know what I mean? But and I want to ask, who approves what books are taught in school about slavery? Is it, I don't know, maybe rich people? Could it be rich people? Could it be the elites who decide that? Yeah, it was. That's right. So let me ask a question, okay? In 1800, let me just give you some facts, okay? The 1800s, you got 25% of white people had slaves. Okay. Or no, I'm sorry. 25% of the South. 12.5% of white people had slaves. Okay. So let's jack that up to 15%. 15% of white people in the United States had slaves that were black. What does that tell you? I mean, it tells me that 85% of white people didn't have slaves and didn't even believe in slavery. And if you think about it, you don't even have to look in a history book. You can just use your freaking brain. Everyone back then in the 1800s was just working on a farm or something. You know what I mean? The average pay was like, what, a penny a freaking week for the poor, and the rich, it might be like, what, 10 cents, or the middle class, it might have been, 10 cents or a nickel a week. or something like that, how are they going to buy an $800 slave? How does someone who makes less than $1 a year buy an $800 slave? $600 to $1,000 slave. How does that happen? I'll tell you, it doesn't happen. And that's all you need is common sense to figure it out. You don't have to even look in the history books. Little on a House on the Prairie guy didn't have slaves because he couldn't afford them. Okay? And that's why most people didn't believe in slavery that were white, because they were poor. And they didn't believe in that kind of crap. They know what it was like to be poor. Okay? I want you to think about this too. Who was the very, very, very first black slave that was a full slave? Like, you're a slave, your kid's a slave, you'll never get out of it, you're a slave, we can do anything I want, your property. Like a dog or a wheel or a lighter or whatever. You're a property. You're an object. Who was that? How did that happen? How did it come about? And you can look this up. Wikipedia, Google, whatever. It was actually a black man. A black man had a black indentured servant. In case you don't know, I'm going to define the three things: serf, indentured servant, and slave. And then serf, back in the days, you would have the kings and the queens, and you'd have the nobles, and those people could own land, okay? And then you have everyone else below them. Those were the serfs, okay? Serfs, because it's a monarchy, you don't get to vote, you don't get no say in anything. You weren't allowed to own land, okay? So the nobles and the kings, they didn't own the serfs, okay? But in a way they did, because where's the serf going to live? He has to live on someone's property because he can't own property himself. So if you're a nobleman and I live on your property, that means I got to have a farm that I'm farming on my little land. I got to give him 90% of the food. He can come down and beat me anytime I want. Of course, I'm free. I can leave. I'm not a slave. I'm a serf. But what's the point in leaving? I'm going to go to another nobleman and he's going to be just a jerk off, as much as a jerk off as the one I got now. You know what I mean? So you weren't a slave. You had freedom, but you really didn't have freedom. You know what I mean? Because you could leave, but like I said, you're going to go to another nobleman. He's going to treat you just as bad, take all your food. You know what I mean? Now, what's an indentured servant? An indentured servant is, let's say I want to borrow some money from you, or I owe money from you because I do some damage or something to your property or whatever. I would have a contract, an indentured servant contract, where I live on your land and I work and work and work until I pay off my debt that I owed you from either borrowing or whatever the debt is from. You know what I mean? And you were supposed to be treated with respect. You know what I mean? You weren't supposed to be able to beat your indentured servants, although sometimes you could. You know, they would, even though they aren't supposed to. And in the Bible, this is, people always say, oh, they're not talking about real slavery in the Bible. They're talking about indentured servitude. No. In the Bible, it clearly says, if you are Jewish, then you can only be an indentured servant, and that you should and must be respected by the person that you're indebted to, and that you should not be beaten or treated any way badly in any way, okay, because they're Jewish. You don't. But a slave now, on the other hand, okay, a slave is property, all right? And in the Bible, a slave is someone who is a foreigner, that you went in and you took them. That's a slave. You can do whatever. There's actually rules in the Bible about how you beat your slave, how you kill your slave. Like, there's a moral way to kill your slave and there's an immoral way to kill your slave. The Bible says that if you beat your slave and he dies within 3 days, that's immoral. Okay, that's immoral. You shouldn't do that. But if you beat your slave and you can make him survive for 3 days and 1 second, then it is a very moral murder. You've murdered your slave morally and righteously, and you have every right to do it that way, according to the Bible. It is clearly in the Bible. But no one, you point. And what's funny is you point it out to some Christians. They don't care. They just say, "That's God. God can do whatever He wants. He's God." Yeah. What can I say? So now we know the difference between these three definitions. And the slave was, so how did the first black slave come about in the United States, right? Or in the Americas? Well, in the Americas, I'm pretty sure this was before the United States even existed, okay? This is just in the Americas, an England colony. A black man, okay, had a black indentured servant. The indentured servant did some type of damage to the rich black man, okay? He maybe started a fire and he, ruined all his crops, or I can't remember what damage he did, but he did enough damage to whereas even as an indentured servant, he could work 2 lifetimes and still never pay back what he owed to that guy for damages, okay? And so, and everyone acts like black people didn't have rights and this. This guy got an attorney. He took him to court, right? This black man took him to court, and he made the courts make that indentured servant into the first black slave. So who started black slavery in the Americas? A black guy. A black guy, yeah. But white people, it's all their fault. Always remember, it's always the white people. So that's one crazy thing that people don't realize, you know what I mean? Another crazy thing is, you have two rules of thought when it comes to historians, okay? One rule of thought is that there were just as many white slaves in Northern Africa as there were in black slaves in the United States during, in the Americas during slavery back then. The other turn of thought or whatever is that there were more white slaves in Northern Africa than there were black slaves in the Americas. There's no train of thought that says that there were less. You know what I mean? So, but we're always like, the black man has just been so, it's so horrible that he was a slave. Even though there were more, or at least just as many white, and that's just in Northern Africa. That isn't talking about the whole world. You know what I mean? But who's responsible for all slavery? And then the other facts. The slavery has gone on, like everyone, the left and the woke religion, they act like slavery started in the United States and that we started it and we're the most horrible people. No, slavery has been around since humans could enslave. As soon as someone had a weapon and can enslave someone, they did it. You know what I mean? Because they were human. And then it was irrelevant about the color of skin, man. And slaves started out being the same race as you because you know what I mean? You generally got in a war with the neighboring country who was the same color as you, and you would enslave them after the war. You know what I mean? So, and if you asked historians, who's the worst at slaving? The Asians. Every historian is going to pick the Asians, man. Are they like 20 million times worse than the other races? No, they're not. They're just like, they're all basically the same, but they can't be exactly the same. They're not going to be down to the number of slaves, you know what I mean? So there's got to be someone who's the worst and someone who's bad. They're all basically equal, though. But if you had to pick one, the Asians, not the whites, were actually the worst at enslaving people, man. And then you got another fact here, that who stopped slavery? You got the left saying no one stopped slavery or whatever. I don't know what they're saying. I guess they're saying black people. Yeah, that's what a lot of woke people say, that black slaves rose up and because they're so strong and their strength, they took over and they ain't slaves no more. Then you got the right saying, well, white people from UK and white people from the United States, they stopped slavery. Now, what does a Pastafarian say? A Pastafarian doesn't bring up race because it's irrelevant what color the skin is. That's inconsequential and it's meaningless. So what do I say as a Pastafarian? Who ended slavery? The UK and the United States.